Do you want them to know the truth, Jungkook? Jimin's voice sliced through the deafening arena, every syllable amplified by the mic in his hand. His eyes were locked onto Jungkook's, not with the warmth fans were used to, but with an intensity that made the thousands of armies watching shift uncomfortably in their seats. The stage lights bathed them in a halo of white and gold, yet the tension between them made the air feel suffocating. Jungkook stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as though every breath was a battle. The crowd's cheers had long faded into a low, restless murmur. They could sense something was wrong, something unscripted. In Jimin's other hand, a phone screen glowed faintly. The faint reflection lit the edges of his jaw, revealing the tightness there. He raised the phone slowly, his voice low but unwavering. "You thought this would stay between us," he said, almost whispering. Yet the microphone carried it to every corner of the stadium. "But you left me no choice." Jungkook took a single step forward, his voice shaking. "Don't do this here. It wasn't a command. It was a plea." But Jimin's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace, his free hand trembling almost imperceptibly. The arena lights dimmed slightly, part of the stage design for the next segment, but now it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The phone in Jimin's hand lit up fully as he swiped, the text growing larger on the massive LED screens behind them. Gasps erupted like a chain reaction across the crowd. The message was short, only a few lines, but every word carried the weight of betrayal. "I can't keep pretending anymore. Every time I see him, I remember what happened. Tell no one." Jungkook's eyes darted toward the screen, then back to Jimin, his entire body tense. "You don't understand." "I understand enough." Jimin cut in sharply, his voice cracking on the last word. He took a deep breath, his chest heaving as though he had just crossed a finish line. The scent of sweat, stage smoke, and something electric fear maybe hung thick in the air. The fans didn't know whether to scream, cry, or remain silent. Some had their phones out, recording every second. Others covered their mouths, eyes wide, torn between disbelief and heartbreak. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, pacing a step to the left, then back again, as if trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. His mind was a storm images of late-night conversations, words sent in vulnerability, and the possibility of those words being twisted beyond repair. He wasn't just fighting Jimin right now. He was fighting the eyes of thousands, and the judgment that would come from millions more once the clips hit the internet. Jimin's fingers tightened around the phone, knuckles paling. His voice softened, but there was no less steel in it. "You owe them the truth, Jungkook, not the version you've been selling." His gaze didn't waver, though his breath was uneven. Jungkook's heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the murmur of the crowd. He had always been composed under pressure, always able to wear a mask when needed. But now, with his private words exposed, he felt stripped to the bone. There was no choreography for this moment, no script to follow. The stage lights flared again, as if the system was trying to reset, casting long, sharp shadows across their faces. The music for the next set quietly cued in the background, an awkward reminder that this was supposed to be a concert, not a public trial. "I didn't want to hurt you," Jungkook finally said, his voice quieter than the whispers in the crowd, but still carried by the mic. "But you've turned this into something else." Jimin's jaw tightened. "No, Jungkook, you did that." His words hung in the air like smoke thick, inescapable and choking. Somewhere in the front row, a fan burst into tears. In the back, others exchanged confused, frantic glances. The arena felt like a pressure cooker, every second adding heat. And in that heat, both Jimin and Jungkook stood, not as bandmates, not as friends, but as two people whose trust had shattered in full view of the world. The roar of the stadium had turned into a storm, uneven thunder made of gasps, shouted questions, scattered screams, and 1,000 phones trembling in 1,000 hands. Security sprang from the shadows with apologetic smiles that fooled no one. The playback track died mid-beat. Lights hesitated. The LED screen held the final sentence of the chat like a courtroom exhibit that wouldn't be put away. Jimin lowered the phone, and for a breath that hurt to hold, he simply looked at Jungkook, as if begging the past to blink first. Jungkook walked toward him, not fast, and not slow either, each step careful. His shoulders squared against the same cameras that had once crowned him untouchable. The sweat along his jawline gleamed in the hostile gold of the stage lights. "You want honesty?" His voice was dangerously steady, a mirror with a crack you only saw if you leaned close. Let's not pretend you didn't know. Jimin flinched. It was small, but in an ecosystem calibrated to the twitch of a fingertip and the angle of a smile, even that was a quake. I knew you were lying to me, he said. That's different from knowing this. He lifted the phone again, and for a dizzy second, Jungkook imagined tearing it from Jimin's hand with the kind of desperation that leaves bruises. The thought terrified him. The thought tempted him. Hyung, please. The honorific came out raw, a cut with no bandage. Not like this, Jimin swallowed, his throat working as if every drop of spit had turned to glass. He had the obsessively neat habit of smoothing his thumb along the case of his phone whenever he was angry and trying not to show it. He was doing it now, slow circles, like he could polish away the reflection of who they were becoming under these lights. Then where? He said. Because in the dressing room, things get answered with silence. On the van rides, they get answered with sleep. In the studio, they get answered with work. Out here, at least you hear me. A wave of shushing hissed through the crowd as if the fans themselves were embarrassed for them. Jungkook's chest tightened. He glanced left. The stage manager stood at the wings with his headset crooked, mouthing, "Wait, wait, wait." Too late. The moment had been announced to the world, and the world had stood up. Jungkook took another step, close enough now to see the spider-thin fissures in Jimin's eye makeup where tears had tried to escape and been bullied back. I wrote those words, he said. I own them, but you don't even know who they were for. Jimin lifted his chin. Then say it. The speakers popped with the feedback of a hand tightening around a microphone. Somewhere in the upper deck, someone called out, "We love you," a brave, broken little lifeline tossed into a whirlpool. Jungkook's heartbeat thundered behind his ribcage. And then, with the stubbornness of someone who had learned to dance with pain and never let it lead, he spoke. I was talking about Manager Han. The name fell like a trapdoor opening. For a beat, the arena tried to make sense of. It sought a scandal that fit the shape of their expectation and found a stranger waiting there instead. Jimin blinked. He'd expected a ghost with his own face, or a confession that would split them along a line the internet had been drawing for years. But the syllables of the manager's name shook coyly in the lights, registering too mundane to be explosive, too personal not to be. You're lying, Jimin said, but the flame behind it faltered. Jungkook shook his head. I'm tired of pretending nothing happened that night. And every time I see him, every time we both pretend I'm not remembering what I heard. He turned to the LED screen, to his own words blown up into a monument they had to walk around. Tell no one. That part was for you because I knew if I told you, you'd burn the building down to keep me warm. The crowd rippled. The name meant little to them, yet the architecture of shame and fear was something they could read instantly, fluently. Jimin's grip eased on the phone, and a tremor of bewilderment passed through his fingers. What night, Jungkook? He asked quieter, as if a volume knob had been twisted in both their chests. What exactly are you remembering? Jungkook stared at the floor as the haze machine sighed a perfumed breath over his sneakers. For months he had carried a small, raw animal inside him that panicked whenever footsteps stopped outside a door too long, whenever a conversation ended too quickly. He could feel it now, sprinting tight circles. He lifted his gaze. The night you were in the studio recording harmonies and I couldn't sleep. I came back to grab my hoodie. I heard him in the hallway with the executive from Seoul Media. He hovered on the edge of saying it, the fangs of the moment bared. They said I'd be more efficient if I was less attached. Jimin's face hardened, not at Jungkook, but at a plural of men who wore suits like armor and carved feelings like fat from meat. He stuffed the phone into his pocket with a shaky, efficient movement, as if saving it from his own hands. Attached to what? He asked. Us, Jungkook said simply. The air changed. It wasn't forgiveness or a return to innocence, but a dangerous, clarifying cold. The stadium rustled like a forest, about to ignite. Years of in-jokes and late-night soup and shared umbrellas and a shelf of inside references were suddenly under glass with a museum label none of them had written. Jimin took one step into Jungkook's gravity. Why didn't you tell me this before? I tried, Jungkook said. The night at the riverside when you couldn't stop shivering. You were so angry at the world it wouldn't have mattered if I had named the stars. You kissed my knuckles like you were apologizing to my bones and said, "Don't make promises you're not allowed to keep." I heard the leash in it, Hyung. I heard it, and I couldn't tell if you were holding me or letting me go." Jimin's mouth opened and closed like he had a dozen answers and none of them fit. "I was trying to keep us safe," he said finally, voice frayed. "I was trying to draw a circle where no one else could come in. I didn't know the circle was choking you." A flood of sound pressed against them, incoherent and holy. It would have been a relief if not for the shadow, moving at stage, left a silhouette with neat hair and a clipboard, wearing a company smile even at a distance. Manager Han had the patience of a man who had spent his career waiting for doors to open without touching the handle. He gestured for the sound engineer to cut the mics. The engineer hesitated, hands hovering, eyes flicking to the two men under lights who had learned to fill arenas by making silence sound like a verse. Jungkook saw the gesture. He turned back to the crowd with a defiance that felt like a second spine. "We need 5 minutes," he said. And it was unclear whether he was asking or declaring. The roar that answered was permission. Jimin exhaled something that might have been a laugh if it hadn't broken in the middle. 5 minutes stretched with a velocity all their own. Jimin, no longer trusting the phone's weight, slipped it into Jungkook's palm. The contact was lightning. A live wire. 1,000 rehearsals collapsing into a single shared pulse. "I shouldn't have shown it like that," he said, voice low and unpolished. "I wanted to hurt the lie, not you." "You aimed at both," Jungkook replied, but not unkindly. He lifted the phone to eye level and scrolled. Lines of text that read like tour notes and inside jokes and a roadmap to two people who had learned to walk in a straight line while doubling back to each other over and over. He stopped at a message he hadn't written. It was from Jimin, days after the Riverside. "If it's about me, I'd rather you bury it than watch you bleed in daylight." Jungkook swallowed. "You were protecting me," he said, and the words made something vicious in him relax, like a fist unclenching after clinging to a cliff edge too long. "But they were daring me to choose between surviving and being alive." A hand landed lightly on Jungkook's shoulder. It was Manager Han. Up close, he looked less like a man and more like a policy memo that had learned to walk. "Gentlemen," he said, voice dipped in honey to hide the hook, "we need to move on with the program. The fans came for music." Jimin's head tilted, a small, dangerous angle. "They came for truth even when we gave it to them wrapped in melody." Han's smile didn't shift. "Truth is a luxury we exchange for the privilege of filling venues. You know this." Jungkook stepped half a degree closer to Jimin, and the movement felt like switching sides in a war without anyone calling a truce. "Do we?" he asked. "Because I only remember exchanging our names for a chance to mean something." Han's eyes flicked to the LED screen, where the damning sentence still hovered. "Turn that off," he said curtly into his headset. The screen blinked to black, replaced by an innocuous logo that suddenly looked obscene. The crowd booed. The sound was shapeless and righteous, a choir that refused direction. Han's smile calcified. "Backstage," he murmured. "Now." Jimin looked out over the ocean of faces and then at Jungkook. He made the smallest nod, a pact spoken in a language no contract could translate. They followed Han off stage in a corridor of black curtains and hot metal scaffolding, the world collapsing to the scent of cables and dust and the hum of generators. The further they went, the more the roar behind them folded into a dull coastal thunder. A staffer handed them towels they didn't use. Another tried to offer water, misjudged the gravity of the moment, and retreated like a ghost embarrassed to have materialized in daylight. Inside the green room, fluorescent lights flattened everyone into hymns of exhaustion. Posters from past tours stared down with grinning amnesia. Han closed the door, set his clipboard on the table, and pinched the bridge of his nose as if dealing with a migraine more than men. "What you did," he began, and his tone suggested the sentence had been prepared for a while, "was a breach of trust with every person who depends on this machine moving without friction." Jimin bristled. "We are not machine parts." Han's gaze cooled. "You are the engine and the hood ornament. Engines don't argue with oil." He looked at Jungkook. "You especially should understand the stakes, given your tendency to invite storms." Jungkook felt the old anger flicker, the unfairness of being the one who bled most visibly and thus became the mess to clean up. He set the towel on the edge of the couch and chose the scalpel over the hammer. If the storm was always swelling offshore, pretending it's a sunny day doesn't stop the flood. Han's mouth thinned. "You heard a conversation you weren't supposed to. You misunderstood it because you were exhausted. and now you want to use it as a justification for risking a brand that feeds families. Jimin straightened. He'd always been compactly graceful, a force of nature that disguised itself as a bow. What exactly did I misunderstand? Jungkook asked, patient as a surgeon. Perhaps you can repeat it to us here, in this bright little room where truth is allegedly a luxury. Han's eyes flashed. It was an offhand remark about focus and discipline. Everyone at your level hears worse. The point was to protect your longevity. Jungkook felt the animal inside him snarl, then whine, confused. He remembered the cadence of that night's voices, the cool clink of glass on glass, the chuckle that sounded like a drawer closing. Less attached, more efficient. He remembered thinking about the tiny rituals that braided his days to Jimin's shared tea, a quiet elbow squeeze before the first note, the way they always looked for each other in mirrored walls as if needing their echo. If the price of efficiency was to sever those, then longevity was just a longer death. You tried to untie us, he said softly. Han didn't blink. I tried to untangle you from liabilities. Jimin laughed, a quiet, astonished sound that wasn't joy. Liabilities, he repeated, as if the word had a taste, and it had spoiled. Do you know what it costs to turn people into that? Do you know how many times I pretended I found the ceiling, the right height, and the room, the right temperature, just to make it easier to open doors for the two of us? You're emotional, Han said almost kindly. Both of you are. That's why this has to end now. Apologize to the fans for the confusion. Tell them it was a scripted teaser that got misread. Finish the set. We'll handle the rest. We? Jungkook asked. It came out like a growl that hadn't made up its mind whether to be a song. You mean the version of us you drafted at your desk? Han spread his hands. The version that sold out a global tour. Silence swelled, a living thing. The fluorescent lights hummed like bees. In the hallway, feet tapped an anxious tattoo. Jungkook looked at Jimin, the tremor in his hands, finally still, the line of his mouth carved by conviction. They had survived years of being told which of their truths was marketable. They had learned to fold one into the other. Maybe the folding had become the lie. Let's tell them, Jimin said. His voice carried none of the razored heat it had held on stage. It was low and luminous, like a lantern finds its own wick. Not everything. Not details that belong to no one but us. But the part that matters. The part that should never have required permission. Han watched him with the fatal patience of a man expecting gravity to do his work for him. You will regret it. Jungkook smiled without joy. We already regret the years we didn't. A knock grazed the door and then opened before anyone could answer. The PR director stepped in, lines etched around, eyes careful enough to pass for kind. She took in the tableau like a medic triaging a battlefield. They're chanting, she said. We can't hold this any longer. Chanting what? Jimin asked. The director swallowed. Let them speak. Something bright and fierce flashed between them, an ember catching at last. Jimin reached out not for the phone, but for Jungkook's wrist, the pulse there loud and honest. If we do this, he said, we do it together. No heroics, no martyrdoms. We say what we owe them, and we leave out what we owe ourselves. Jungkook nodded. And when they ask us what it means, we tell them it means we're human, that it means we have the right to keep the private parts of our love, even if the world wants to stream it in HD. Han went very still, as if he just realized the laws of physics had shifted and no memo had been sent to his inbox. A jag of contempt cut across his face and vanished like lightning behind glass. If this sinks you, he said, remember I offered you a rope. Jungkook stepped past him, past the clipboard, past the unbreathable air that had settled in the room. If you're worried about sinking, he said without turning, you shouldn't lace stones to our ankles. They walked back down the corridor side by side. The black curtains breathed in and out like lungs. The hum of the crowd surged from distant weather to close seas. As they reached the wings, the arena recognized their silhouettes and shivered into a crescendo that shook the trussing. The light tech signaled. The band quiet, until then looked up with animal readiness, a pack waiting for the alpha's angle of chin. They stepped into the light. It was not a triumph, and it was not a plea. It was a choice. The glare wrapped them in a hard, clean day. The camera cranes bowed with a reverence they didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. Jungkook lifted his mic first. We kept too much inside, he said. No preamble, no apology. We did it to protect each other. We did it because love makes you brave and stupid in equal parts. And because sometimes the people who say they have your best interests in mind only mean your most profitable version. A roar like a dam breaking crashed around the words and carried them along. Jimin's hand brushed Jungkook's back barely a graze, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for tenderness like a secret code. He lifted his own mic. "We're not here to sell you a story tonight. We're here to sing and to tell you one truth. What we share belongs to us first. And if something we said was twisted to hurt you or him, I'm sorry. I was angry, and I used the stage like a weapon. It won't happen again." Jungkook turned his face toward him, surprise and gratitude warring for a second before making peace. "I wasn't innocent," he said. "I hid because I thought I was shielding us from storms. I forgot storms teach you where the foundations are strong." They made eye contact and something shifted. The delicate choreography of 1,000 shows, suddenly irrelevant because the movement they needed was older than rhythm. Jimin drew a breath. "We'll finish this set because music is how we tell the truth when words fail. After that, we'll take a break. We owe ourselves a room without an audience to figure out how to live with the light we just turned on." It wasn't the sort of announcement that could be spun into a cheerful digest. The arena accepted it like a congregation used to difficult scriptures. A chant began ragged at first, then fierce names braided together into something that sounded less like idolatry and more like a promise to witness without owning. The band kicked in because music has never been patient with speeches. The first song was a ballad weathered from years of being sung as comfort, now repurposed as a confession. Jungkook's voice came threaded with grit, resilient and ruinous at once. Jimin's harmony found him on the choruses, wrapped him on the bridge, like hands that had learned both to steady and to push. They stayed close, never touching. The space between them the exact shape of restraint and mercy. The second song burned hotter. Sweat snapped off Jimin's jaw with the violence of exertion. Jungkook's shirt clung to him in salt, dark stripes. Fans cried, laughed, sang until their throats were raw, and held up signs that read nothing more complicated than thank you in languages that made gratitude sound new. Between songs, silence would fall. Not awkward now, but reverent. On those little shelves of quiet, Jungkook heard himself think for the first time in months without hearing the wind-up key turning in his spine. He watched Jimin's lashes cast small shadows on his cheeks when he blinked. Watched his smile tremble and then steady like a bridge testing its own strength. They were rediscovering each other not as roles, but as men who had met in a practice room with bad acoustics and better dreams. When the final notes of the set dissolved, they didn't bow immediately. They stood facing the crowd as if to memorize the precise shape of grace offered back to them. Then they bowed, deeply, and the noise that answered was nothing like hunger. It was blessing. They left the stage with their hands brushing once, accidental and not. Back in the corridor, the applause followed them like a dog at their heels, eager and loyal. Han was waiting, expression arranged into professionalism so careful it looked like grief. The PR director hovered, phone buzzing with a nest of notifications that would require a machete to cut through. The stage manager whispered into his headset like he was trying to keep secrets from the walls. Jimin's chest rose and fell, a flag refusing to lower. "We'll issue a statement," the PR director said softly. "Something that respects what you said without setting fire to the building." "Build better materials," Jimin replied. He didn't mean it to be unkind. He meant it like a blueprint. Han stepped closer, the heel-toe click of his shoes crisp in the seam of afternoise. He studied Jungkook's face, then Jimin's, and seemed to register that in the most important way, he'd already lost. "There will be consequences," he said almost to himself. "There always are." Jungkook nodded. "Then we'll pay the ones we can live with." They returned to the green room, same fluorescent lights, same posters, pretending history was simple. It felt slightly larger now. The towels on the couch looked less like surrender and more like proof that bodies had done their work. A staffer knocked timidly. "Your driver is ready," she said, unsure whether to meet their eyes. "Give us 15 minutes, Jimin said gently. The door clicked shut. They sank onto the couch, not quite touching, both feeling the outline of each other like heat. For a minute they were quiet in the way exhausted people are, thoughts sifting themselves into piles. Jungkook tilted his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. "You scared me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a bruise he'd finally stopped poking, ready to heal. "I scared me," Jimin admitted. "I wanted to tear something open before it smothered us. I grabbed the first sharp thing I had. You grabbed me. I know. Jimin's voice broke like a wave kneeling on a beach. I'm sorry. Jungkook opened his eyes and turned his head. Jimin had his hands folded between his knees, thumbs pressed together like a prayer he was ashamed to say out loud. The sight tugged a smile from Jungkook before he could stop it, soft and wrecked. And still, he said, I'm here. You're stubborn, Jimin said with a ghost of humor. You love me like that. The words didn't shock the ceiling. They didn't set off alarms. They landed in the room with the quiet inevitability of a key sliding home. Jimin looked up sharply, and in his eyes lay the entire atlas of their shared geography rivers they'd crossed, deserts they'd been told to fear, small towns where they'd borrowed anonymity and paid it back with song. He didn't lunge or flee. He just let the truth settle on his shoulders like a jacket that finally fit. Then we have to do this right, he whispered. Not for a headline. For us. Jungkook nodded. We'll talk to the others. To the company. We'll decide what the world gets to keep and what it doesn't. And if they say this ruins everything, then they miscounted everything. They sat long enough for the applause to fade from thunder to rain to the memory of weather. When they finally stood, Jimin reached out and took Jungkook's hand in the clean, ordinary light. No choreography. No cameras. It was not a declaration. It was a beginning that felt in their bones, like a homecoming. The car smelled like cold vinyl and lemon cleaner, and the city beyond the tinted glass twitched with late-night neon and camera flashes that looked like lightning without rain. Jimin and Jungkook sat side by side in the back seat, with their knees barely touching, not because they were afraid to be seen, but because the distance felt like a neutral ground where they could exhale. Their driver checked them in the mirror once gentle, worried, and then pretended to forget they existed. The phones on their laps quivered unceasingly. Headlines multiplied, mutated, and marched. The clip of the LED screen, Jimin's voice cutting the arena open, the way Jungkook's face had gone pale and then steadied as if deciding, mid-beat, to become older. Do you want to see what they're saying? Jimin asked, easing his thumb over the slick edge of his case. It was the softer version of a question with 1,000 teeth. I want to hear you, Jungkook said. Jimin's lips pressed together, then parted with a breath that steadied on the way out. I shouldn't have dragged it into the light like that. I thought if the truth was loud enough, it would drown out the voices telling us to be smaller than we are. It almost drowned me, Jungkook said, and the honesty didn't accuse. It just felt like a weight set down on the floor where both of them could see it. Jimin looked at him. Street lamps feathered silver through the car, etching his profile in patient strokes. And now? Now I know I can float, Jungkook said, and I know why you threw me. They arrived at the penthouse just before midnight. The building's lobby smelled like marble and money, but the security guards had soft eyes and offered soft nods, arrows of quiet that guided them toward the private elevators. The ride up felt like being carried inside a throat. Their reflections multiplied in mirrored chrome. 4 men, then 6, then 8, all of them tired and made of glass. Inside, the living room was tidy, the way a hotel is tidy expensively, impersonally. A citywide hush pressed itself against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the night soft as velvet and just as treacherous. Jungkook dropped his keys in a bowl and flinched at the small, tinny clatter. Jimin drifted toward the window like a moth, considering a flame. They're going to call us first thing, Jimin said. He meant the company. He meant people who loved them in ways that had invoices attached. Let them, Jungkook said. He pulled his hoodie over his head and tossed it on the couch. Suddenly aware of the ache in his shoulders, the throb in his calves, he poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Jimin. Their fingers brushed, a static shock, a spark that didn't apologize for being electricity. When the phones finally rang, they rang together, a duet they had never rehearsed and had no desire to perfect. The PR director's name glowed across the glass. Jimin accepted the call and put it on speaker, setting the phone on the kitchen island between them like a neutral third voice. Are you safe? She asked without preamble. The background noise on her end sounded like an office trying to behave. Yes, Jungkook said. We're home. Good. Listen to me very carefully. Do not post anything. Do not reply to anyone. Be ready by 9 for a call, with legal and leadership. Jimin leaned his weight into the counter, palms flat, the tendons in his wrists carving clean lines beneath skin. What if we want to say something to our fans? Something that isn't laminated? A statement is being drafted, she said, and the gentle regret in her tone was a translation of the word control. We'll send it to you for approval. You know we didn't lie, Jungkook said. We didn't tell them anything that wasn't ours to tell. I know, she said. I also know truth and narrative aren't synonyms. Then pick a new dictionary, Jimin murmured. She exhaled. Rest, please. Let me fight the fires I can fight. We'll talk in the morning. The call ended. They stood in the hum of the refrigerator and the very faint whisper of the city's artery of traffic. Jimin picked up his water and emptied it in 3 swallows, then set the glass down carefully, like a bomb he had diffused. I don't want to beg for permission about what belongs to us, he said. You don't have to, Jungkook answered, sliding his hand along the counter until their fingers touched and synapsed. But we might have to explain it to people who don't know how to read without a price tag. They slept like boxers on the surface, still and spent. Beneath it, fists still half-curled in case the bell rang again. In the dawn that wasn't quite dawn, Jungkook woke to the brittle hush of 2 early messages, the body knowledge that a day had chosen violence without consulting the calendar. He rolled over. Jimin was curled on his side, hair messy, cheek indented by the seam of the pillowcase, looking impossibly young in a way that made Jungkook's chest hurt. He reached out, traced the air an inch from Jimin's temple, not touching, honoring the urge by not indulging it. When they walked into the living room at 8:59, their laptops were open. The video link already waiting, like a thin blue door. Jungkook clicked. The PR director's face filled the screen, hair in a knot that had stopped negotiating hours ago. 2 legal counsels appeared in separate squares, both in crisp shirts and calibrated expressions. Manager Han joined last, his window-framed bookshelves and a tasteful plant, the performance of thoughtfulness. Thank you for making time, Legal 1 said. We'd like to get ahead of this. There's no ahead, Jimin said. There's only with. Legal 2. Adjusted glasses that probably didn't need adjusting. The clip circulating is ambiguous enough to keep us from defamation suits, but we need to ensure that any public statement doesn't imply policy violations on the company's part. It's not implied, Jungkook said calmly. It's recorded in my head. We're not arguing your experience, Legal 1 said. We're arguing the phrasing. PR shared a drafted statement. It was clean and careful and flavorless, the verbal equivalent of clear broth. It apologized for confusion, praised the fans for their understanding, and assured the public that the onstage moment was a regrettable miscommunication between artists who felt deeply about their craft. Delete regrettable, Jimin said. Delete miscommunication. Delete craft while you're at it. What would you prefer? PR asked, not unkindly. Try this, Jungkook said, and his voice found a register that carried without raising. Last night we spoke as people, not products. The truth we shared belongs first to us, and then to anyone who wants to see us as human. We will take time to discuss with our team how to move forward, and we're grateful to the fans who heard us without demanding more than we can give. PR's eyes softened. I can work with that. Legal 1 frowned. The phrase spoke as people, not products, could be interpreted as a condemnation of company practices. If the shoe fits, Jimin said. Han finally spoke. We can't run a corporation on poetry and outrage. We've been run on less, Jungkook said, and survived. A small, tentative ping stole everyone's attention as PR's phone lit up. She glanced down, then looked back with a shock she couldn't contain. You need to see this, she said, and dropped a link in the chat. It led to a freshly uploaded audio clip unlisted but already spreading in group chats with the velocity of a secret people wanted to be righteous about. PR pressed play. It was the sound of laughter inside a hallway with too much echo. Glass clinked. A man cleared his throat, the executive from Seoul Media, unmistakable even to those who had only ever heard him postured and polished on investor calls. Then came Han's voice, lower, companionable, the syllables wrapped in the linen of discretion. He's talented, no question, Han said on the recording. But the attachment is a liability. You know how it is. If we can prise them apart a bit, we'll get more hours, fewer complications. You'll break their mystique, the executive chuckled. That's branding, Han said easily. This is business. The audio cut with a hiss. Silence spiked the call. Jimin's mouth went slack. Jungkook stared at the tiny red progress bar as if it were a fuse that had burned and was now looking for something else to catch. Where did that come from? Legal 2 asked, pale. PR looked at Han, whose face had become a mask with the eye holes cut too small. "Do you deny it?" she asked softly, because loudness would have been too blunt an instrument for the moment's precision. Han didn't deny it. "You're hearing two colleagues having a hypothetical conversation about resource management. Taken out of context, it sounds cruel. In context, it's strategy. The context," Jungkook said, and now his voice had heat, "is that I stopped sleeping without putting my phone in the freezer to numb my fingers from checking it. The context is, I learned how to sing through the kind of lump in my throat that makes every note feel like punishment. The context is, Jimin thought his love was a leash because you called it one." PR turned her camera off for 3 seconds. When she turned it back on, her eyes were bright. "We won't be using the original statement," she said. "We'll use yours." Legal One sputtered. "This is necessary?" PR finished. "And overdue." Han sat very still, a portrait of professionalism. But an old spark had gone out behind his eyes. "You're burning bridges you'll need again," he said. "Then we'll build better ones," Jimin replied. The call ended with PR promising to send a revised draft in an hour, and Legal promising other promises none of them were listening to. The apartment felt suddenly full of air that hadn't been allowed in before. Jungkook moved first, restless with the adrenaline of truth. He paced a line between the window and the couch, then stopped and faced Jimin. "Who recorded that?" he asked. Jimin's brows knit. "We didn't." "Someone did," Jungkook said. "Someone who heard and cared." The answer came in the form of a text from an unknown number. He read it once and handed the phone to Jimin. It was a short message, written with the economy of someone who believed in actions more than words. "Sorry, I cleaned the hallway that night. I heard. I kept it because I didn't know who would be brave first. Please protect my job." No name, no emoji, just an attached voice memo. The original audio, unedited. Jimin's fingers trembled as he held the phone like a bird he wanted to release but knew the sky outside had hawks. "We protect them," he said. "Non-negotiable." They drafted a reply together. A promise lined with caution. "Thank you. We'll never reveal your identity. If you need help, we'll find a way to give it. For now, stay quiet." Delete the message after reading. The revised statement from PR arrived just after noon. It was almost word for word what Jungkook had offered, with the addition of a single line that felt like a small miracle. "We will not be responding to speculation. We are choosing, together, what is shared and what remains ours." They approved it. It posted. The internet did what the internet does. Some screamed, some argued, some wept in comment sections like little churches. A trending tag surged with a velocity that felt like vindication. Let them be. Another crawled bitterly along like a tick. Professionalism matters. Jimin and Jungkook read what they could without swallowing the ocean. They stopped when their hands reached across the cushion and found each other. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was the rest of the team-tired faces, wary smiles, a collective history knocking. One by one, the members stepped inside with the soft clatter of shoes and the hard gravity of care. Taehyung hugged them both so tightly the air squeaked out of their lungs. Namjoon stood with arms crossed and eyes that had measured 100 storms. Yoongi sat immediately, knees apart, elbows on thighs, head bowed slightly as if he were listening to a beat in the floor. Hoseok's hands fluttered like birds, looking for a safe branch before he put one on Jimin's shoulder, one on Jungkook's. Jin looked at them and managed a crooked smile that said more than any sentence could. "Are we okay?" Namjoon asked. And the question was big enough to fill the room and small enough to fit neatly between two heartbeats. "We will be," Jungkook said. "Not because it will be easy, because we decided." Yoongi lifted his gaze, black eyes bright with a pragmatic tenderness. "You just changed the price of our peace," he said. "That's all. We can pay it together or let someone else set the bill." "They have a recording," Jimin added. And when he told them the story, when he played the clipped chuckle, the executive's smooth cruelty and Han's smoother pragmatism, the room changed temperature. Rage is a kind of weather. It swept through with a clean wind that smelled like iron and resolve. "We protect the person who sent it," Jin said it once. "We make it so their safety doesn't depend on our secrecy, but on policy. And if policy refuses, we make policy regret its choice." Hoseok exhaled and shook his hands out as if preparing to go on stage. "So, press conference?" "Maybe not," Namjoon said. thinking the way he always thought. A builder taking in the span of empty air and deciding what scaffolding it required. Not yet. Let the statement breathe. Let them reveal themselves in their replies. Then we choose the moment that's ours. They stayed for hours, wearing a path in the carpet with the pacing of men who had learned movement as strategy. They ate takeout noodles that tasted like childhood. They laughed once or twice, real and surprised, at memories too stubborn to be erased by a bad 24 hours. When they left, they did so the way they arrived. One by one, with hands lingering on shoulders and forearms, with eyes holding the extra second that says, "Don't be brave alone." Evening stained the sky a deep cobalt, and with it came a message from PR. The audio had been leaked beyond their control, but the source remained anonymous. The executive from Seoul Media had issued a denial so clean it slid right off the audio's jagged edges. Han had stayed silent, his absence in the conversation suddenly a presence of its own. "They'll try to pivot," Jungkook said, painted as a misunderstanding between men who care too much about excellence. "Then we show them excellence that doesn't require us to amputate parts of ourselves," Jimin replied. He moved to the piano in the corner, a glossy black lake holding 1,000 unplayed notes. He lifted the fallboard and set his fingers down gently, as if introducing them. The first chords he coaxed from the keys were simple, an apology spelled in sound. Jungkook leaned against the curve of the instrument and let his voice find the melody, a line that walked a balance beam between vulnerability and strength. They wrote like they always had when no one was watching, by making their hearts hold still long enough for their hands to catch up. The lyric arrived slow, and then all at once, it acknowledged what had been said and what had been unsaid. It refused to be specific in the places that would turn tenderness into content. It promised to be brave without promising to burn. When they finished, it was not a complete song, and it didn't need to be. It was a map folded to the square of the journey they were ready to take that night. "Let's play it for them," Jimin said, and he didn't mean the company. They went live from a private account whose username had been a joke once. The comments bloomed like confetti the moment fans realized what door they'd stumbled through. They said nothing before the first note. They said everything after the last. The camera saw 2 men and a piano and a room where the light was warm and private. Their shoulders touched. Their faces did not angle themselves for best sides. They sang like a promise, written on skin. When they finished, they didn't kill the live. They let silence arrive and be loved for a change. Jungkook spoke first in the hush, voice low, hands on the keys because his body needed to touch something that vibrated back. "Thank you for hearing us," he said. "We can't give you every page. We can show you that the book is ours." Jimin's smile was small and real. "Sleep," he urged, as if he were talking to them but also to himself. "Eat. Be kind to each other in the comments. We'll be here tomorrow." They ended the stream, and the room seemed to hold a different kind of darkness, gentler, part of the furniture. The phones, for once, did not feel like weapons. The internet did what it does in its best moments. It turned down the temperature without turning away. The worst corner snarled, but their voices sounded lonely. At midnight, the doorbell rang again. For a split second, instincts sharpened to points. Jungkook checked the peephole and blinked in surprise. A young woman in a maintenance uniform stood there with a canvas tote and fear hitching her breath. He opened the door only as wide as a question. "Yes?" She held up the tote. "I'm sorry," she said, words tumbling. "I shouldn't be here. I brought this in case they try to say the audio was fabricated. It's the original recording. It has metadata. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't. Jimin was already there. He didn't ask how she knew their address, because fear makes people resourceful, and love for truth makes them reckless. He ushered her inside only far enough to stand out of view from the hallway. "What's your name?" "Don't tell me," Jungkook said gently, and she flinched, then nodded gratefully. "We will never say you came," Jimin promised, taking the tote as if it contained something living. "We'll protect you." Her eyes filled in that way people's eyes fill when a promise lands somewhere hunger had been. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry they did that to you." "You're not the one who should be sorry," Jungkook said. She left without looking back, the elevator swallowing her with a soft ding. They stood in the entryway with the tote between them like a sacred thing. Inside were a small recorder, a time-stamped log from the building's cleaning schedule, and a note in block letters. You don't owe anyone your pain to be believed. But if they make you prove it, here. For the first time all day, Jungkook laughed, a startled, incredulous sound that turned warm halfway through. The world can be cruel, he said, but sometimes it delivers an angel in a uniform. They made copies. They encrypted them and stored them where paranoia would sleep at last. They wrote another message to PR, shorter this time. We have additional proof. We will not release it, unless forced to protect the source. Prepare for both outcomes. Sleep, when it finally came, did not feel like surrender. It felt like a truce negotiated by people who had learned to want the morning. Jimin drifted first, cheek pillowed on the back of Jungkook's shoulder, breath soft against cotton. Jungkook stayed awake long enough to memorize the cadence, the way peace sounded when it was close enough to warm your skin. In the morning, sunlight laid a bright ladder on the floor. Their statement had climbed. The audio had multiplied. Legal had sent an email with subject lines that showed their fear finally speaking its name. PR had replied with a new strategy that didn't insult their intelligence or their hearts. Han had requested a meeting. The executive had called them unprofessional on a business show and mispronounced Jimin's name. Let's go, Jimin said after coffee made their blood remember rhythm. Let's hear him. They took the elevator again, this time to the company's floor where the air conditioner spoke a language of endless summer, and the receptionist smiled like a brave soldier in a war she had not enlisted to fight. Han waited in a conference room with glass walls and a city view that pretended to be a consolation prize. PR sat beside him, spine straight, face open. Legal had divided themselves on either side like bookends trying to keep a shelf from collapsing. Namjoon joined, uninvited and very welcome. And Yoongi slid into a chair at the last minute, with the energy of a well-placed knife. Han began without his usual preface of throat clearing. What I said was indefensible, he admitted. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. Jimin blinked twice, slow. Then why are we here? Because the company is deciding whether to make me a scapegoat or an example, Han said. And the vulnerability in the word deciding changed nothing about the damage he'd helped engineer, and everything about the path they now stood on. And because I need to tell you that I believed I was doing the right thing. The right thing for whom? Yoongi asked mildly. For the brand, Han said. Namjoon sighed, the sound like a page turning. The problem with brands, he said, is that they can't bleed. People can. I see that now, Han replied. And to his credit, his voice did not wobble with the self-pity of a man newly aware of his own shadow. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking to help repair what I can before I leave. Leave? Jungkook said. Han nodded. Resignation. It will be announced today. Not as an admission of guilt, but as an acknowledgement that the trust required for this work is gone. I'll accept the severance they offer and the silence they request, and I'll break it if they lie about you. Silence moved through the room like a cautious animal. PR's lips parted, closed, parted again. There's another option, she said carefully. We restructure. We create formal policies that protect boundaries between professional oversight and personal autonomy. We establish a code of conduct that forbids the kind of conversations captured on that audio. We make you sign it, she added to Han, and everyone else in leadership. We publish it. Legal One looked as if she'd suggested they all take up skydiving. Publish it? Yes, PR said, a small, fierce smile curving like a blade. The brand learns to bleed when necessary. People stop having to. Jimin looked at Jungkook and found there what he needed, a steady, clear yes. We'll support that, he said, on the condition that the person who recorded the audio is protected. Han nodded. Done. No NDAs that turn truth into contraband, Jungkook added. No threats. Actual protection. Han's gaze held his, and for a moment, just a moment, the man he had been before policy calcified him into a function looked back. You have my word, he said, and I will make sure it is written in policy, so my word doesn't have to be enough. The meeting moved, then, from confession to construction. Namjoon articulated pillars with the patience of an architect who had run out of patience with band-aids. Yoongi sharpened vague phrases into enforceable language. PR taught Legal how to make a sentence both truthful and impossible to misquote. Jimin and Jungkook insisted on a clause that enshrined. Artists determine the boundaries of their personal lives. Management does not. When they finished, the document was not perfect, because nothing built in a morning can be, but it was better than the air they had been breathing. When they left the company, cameras waited like flowers that bite. The reporters called their names with feigned softness, questions dressed up like gifs. Jimin and Jungkook did not stop. They did not run. They walked like men acquainted with the cost of forward motion and unwilling to settle for stillness. In the car, they exhaled at the same time and smiled at the accidental unison. "Lunch?" Jungkook asked, and the absurdity of the question, its mercy, cracked something bright open in both of them. They laughed. They ordered kimbap and spicy soup and ate at their kitchen counter like college kids on a stolen afternoon. The first apology came at dusk, an internal memo from the company to all staff, acknowledging the audio and the harm. It wasn't public, and that stung, but it bowed in the right direction. The second apology came from the executive's office in the form of a punitive denial. So polished, it whistled. The third apology came from Han, privately, in a message that didn't attempt to balance scales. It couldn't. "I am sorry. I forgot the difference between efficiency and erasure. I won't forget again, even if I'm not here to practice it." "People can change," Jimin said quietly. "People can choose to," Jungkook answered. Night settled. They wrote again, because that was how their bodies knew to metabolize the day. They practiced saying yes and no and later and never again. They made tea and watched steam find the ceiling. They moved through the apartment without choreographing it, their paths crossing in the ordinary choreography of a life shared unapologetically. When sleep came, it did not have to be bargained with. The world would not be kind tomorrow just because they had been brave today. But the room had learned a new silence, the kind that doesn't mean secrecy, the kind that means rest. And when they woke, they did so with their hands close enough that the smallest movement would close the distance, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit, a habit that felt, finally, like living. Morning unspooled like a reel, already loaded with scenes that couldn't be reshot. The apartment was quiet enough to hear the soft pop of the toaster and the little hiss when the kettle surrendered boiling. Jimin's hair stuck up at a shameless angle, and Jungkook, still in a t-shirt with yesterday's creases, watched the sunlight chart a path across the floorboards until it reached his bare feet and warmed them. Their phones lay face down on the counter like sleeping animals they didn't dare wake. They ate in that protective hush, and even the smallest sounds felt gentle. The scrape of a chair, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, a laugh that arrived before either of them had made a joke. The day didn't stay gentle. It never was going to. PR's message landed first. Media requests had metastasized overnight. 3 global networks wanted an exclusive. A domestic morning show offered a safe, supportive conversation. A glossy magazine pitched a photo essay about the real them. The email almost tender in its audacity. Attached was a schedule grid with color codes for interviews, rehearsals, and the policy meeting Namjoon was shepherding like a man who had finally been allowed to build a bridge instead of just patching potholes. "Say no to everything for 48 hours, Jimin said, wiping a thumb along the rim of his mug and staring into the thin stain of tea like it might reveal a message. "Then we choose one conversation we control. Or we make our own," Jungkook said. "Not alive this time. A room with real chairs and water and rules. Their rules always pretend to be ours," Jimin replied, but a smile tugged. "Okay, our room." They were still sketching the bones of that room, how many cameras, which questions they wouldn't touch, which ones they'd answer so cleanly speculation would starve when the intercom buzzed with the kind of insistence that makes shoulders stiffen. Security announced a visitor who wasn't on any list, Jimin's mother. Shock snapped Jimin upright. He flicked a glance at Jungkook, at the table, at the unmade beds of their lives, then back at the speaker. "Let her up," he said. And those 3 words contained entire childhoods, entire pilgrimages, and the hope that the elevator would move slowly enough for him to find a face he'd be brave with. She walked into the apartment carrying a bag full of food because mothers always arrive with provisions for the siege. Her eyes shone, not with scandal-sick curiosity, but with the complicated brightness of someone who loves you and is angry at the weather that keeps trying to ruin picnics. She set the bag on the counter, took in both of their faces, and said the most human thing in the world. "Have you eaten enough?" Jimin's relief was almost ridiculous. "Yes," he said, then faltered, then told the truth. "No." She hugged him first, hard enough to squeeze a sound out of him that might have been a laugh or a sob. Then she turned to Jungkook and folded him into the same stern mercy. Do you have any idea how many years I've watched you boys run and pretend it was play? She asked when she pulled back. Sit. Both of you. They sat. She unpacked containers with a brisk competence, filled bowls, shoved chopsticks into hands, and only then did she look like a woman who had been up all night reading headlines that made her want to throw her phone into a river. I'm not asking for details, she began. I am telling you what I know. You are good men. You have made mistakes. You will make more. Anyone who loved you less would ask you to be perfect. I'm not foolish enough to make that request. She turned to Jimin. But don't you ever weaponize a stage like that again. Not against someone you love. Jimin took the rebuke with his head bowed, shame and gratitude braided. I know, Ioma. I know. I lost my temper. I was so tired of lies pretending to be disciplined. She nodded, then leveled her gaze at Jungkook. And you, if you are brave enough to love my son, be brave enough to stand here tomorrow and the next day and the next when the weather changes. I don't mean in front of cameras. I mean in front of the sink, in front of the laundry, in front of the small days. Do you understand me? Jungkook's throat worked. Yes, he said, and his voice had the steadiness of someone signing something that mattered. I do. She softened then, the sternness dissolving into that very particular worry that counts the bones of your face and the hours of your sleep. Good. Now tell me who I need to yell at. They laughed, and their laughter had the delicate sound of glass that had cracked and learned how to hold water anyway. She stayed for an hour, deployed advice like little umbrellas, practical, collapsible, invaluable in sudden storms, and left with the promise that she would draw fire from family members with opinions too loud for open windows. After the door clicked shut, the apartment felt different, like a blessing had been tucked into the corners where dust liked to hide. They didn't have long to savor the reprieve. A notification pinged on both phones at once. A special report had just aired on a morning show. 4 hosts with good teeth and glossy mugs discussing the ethics of private lives in public professions. They watched the clip with that weird detachment fame teaches half wince, half anthropological interest. The hosts managed to say the words love and boundaries and responsibility so many times they lost their shape. And then the show cut to a man in a suit with an easy smile and a tidy stack of malice disguised as concern. The sole media executive. He called them immature. He called them unprofessional. He spoke of role models and influence and the responsibility to the economy of an industry that feeds families. He mispronounced Jimin's name again. He didn't mention the audio. He didn't have to. The clip was designed to frame a narrative. 2 artists too drunk on their own mythos to follow the rules that make the world spin. By the time the show ended, the apartment felt like a clenched fist. Jungkook paced the length of the couch and back again, the rhythm of his steps like a drumline determined to march through a wall. We can't let him own the teacher voice, he said. We can't let him pretend we're the unruly students. We strip the classroom, Jimin replied. We speak as men who pay the electric bill for the stage lights he thinks he owns. We pick one interview, Jungkook said, breath steadying into strategy. Not the morning show. Not anyone who needs us to collapse into sound bites. We ask for 40 minutes. Live, so no one can carve us into convenient. PR replied fast. She'd been expecting this pivot. She offered 3 options. The third was a veteran journalist known for quiet questions that left nowhere to hide. The kind of conversation that made truth sit up straight. They chose him without looking at each other. The studio was an old theater with the seats stripped out a cavern of honest brick and work-worn wood. The lights went up, but not the way they did on stage. They were kinder here, designed to reveal without burning. The journalist shook their hands with a gaze that felt like looking into a clean mirror. Thank you for trusting me, he said. And it didn't sound like a line he said to everyone. They sat across from him at a round table. No mugs, no scripted banter, microphones hidden, cameras quiet. The red light blinked on, and the journalist offered them an opening line that didn't ensue in